Hi everyone, so we got a new data mine from the server slam patch last night. This is version 0.9, which is really close to the release version apparently, and they have done a lot of adjustments. So this is definitely way more than we thought would happen, and based on what they said from the post-beta blog post that they made, talking about, a few tweaks here and there, like, chain lightning getting nerfed and all that. Yeah, that did happen. But 2,000 other things also happened. We went through this for a few hours last night, and here on Diablo Fans they actually have like a nice overview with some highlighted changes. So I'm gonna try to break this down for you. The high-level overview is that especially Barbs got hit quite heavily with nerfs, which was kind of expected, I guess, based on some stuff that we have seen with geared up Barbs with like the 400k crits. Like those are not gonna happen anymore, at least not at level 20. So this kind of like insane damage multiplier stacking with like aspects of the expectant and aspect of limitless rage and upheaval with the extra damage per generator cast and these kind of things is basically gone. This will also affect some of the endgame builds. Barb is also significantly squishier now, so they're probably not going to be like, by far the best damage and by far the most tanky class both at the same time anymore in the endgame, which was kind of like the expected trajectory of where they will end up in the end. So they are just like, yeah, overall tuned down a bit. I think in general, actually, Blizzard has done a lot of really good adjustments here. I think they definitely identified mostly the 2 OP stuff that at least I have identified so far. And they actually, really put the nerfs in the right place almost always. As you may know, I've been using my streams lately to very crafty 4 builds, and I have a big library already, and we have even more here, and even more here, and even more here. So I think I have a really good understanding of all of the classes and the kind of options that you have on each of them. And I think with most of these adjustments, especially some of the nerfs of the OP stuff, that we're gonna have a lot more options on a lot of the classes now. Now, obviously, not everything got nerfed. There were also buffs to certain things, so there are also some really big winners here. So it's not just like all, doom and gloom, basically. But it might definitely be noticeable if you play like the same build that you played last time. And, for example, you played a Chain Lightning Sorc, or you played like, like Barb with these kind of combinations of legendary powers, that you will feel weaker now, at least in the early game, until, when the game comes out and you have more synergies and higher levels where you can actually make builds really work. In order to avoid making this like a 2-hour video now, I'm gonna mostly talk about the big topics and then leave some of the minor details here and there for you guys to read on your own. I have the link in the description. But yeah, in general, the Barb, we have some nerfs for some of the legendary aspects that allow you to do like this insane, like, wombo combo stacking. So they have been massively tuned down, and also the shouts have been nerfed. So all 3 of the shouts got a hit. We can see this here, for example, Rallying Cry gives you less fury now, War Cry gives you less fortify, less damage. They did buff Whirlwind though, relatively significantly actually. So especially like this bleed Whirlwind stuff. So this is going to be relatively good, I think, especially for early leveling. I actually started making a leveling build for Whirlwind, which I think is going to be relatively good now. So that is at least some light at the end of the tunnel there. They also like slightly nerfed Hoda and Upheaval and these kind of things, and also Challenging Shout. So it will be much harder for Challenging Shout to achieve perma invincibility now. So that was a concern before, that Challenging Shout with enough skill ranks will eventually just lead to 100% damage reduction, making you invulnerable. And that is technically still possible with a rank 16 Challenging Shout, which is going to be harder to achieve than the previous necessary threshold of rank 13. So obviously this is not anything for Server Slam, this is for the release, but it will probably still be possible to achieve that. But they also nerfed the duration, it's only 6 seconds instead of 8 seconds, so having permanent uptime of that is also harder to do. So we'll see if we're going to end up with a permanent invincible Barbs anyway. There is actually a chance of that happening, but at least it's not like as easy to do anymore. They also nerfed a few of the passes on Barb, but that was already expected because, for example, they said that they gave the Barbs like a base per 10% damage reduction as like a stronger defense on the start. So they tuned down some of these other effects like the damage reduction while fortified or other things. so that it kind of evens out, I guess. I think what this will do in the end is that triple shout builds are not necessarily going to be the norm anymore, especially because of the nerf to the limitless rage aspect, and because the nerfs are just, yeah, making the shouts not as required anymore. And that was actually a huge concern. So if I look at my own Barb builds, they're basically like all, you know, shout, 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 maybe a leap, and then left click, right click, and that's it. Or, you know, maybe shout, 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 ultimate, left click, right click. So yeah, there was not really that much of a reason to choose anything besides those shouts. And now there might definitely be reasons to include something like a rupture, a death blow, you know, a leap, a charge, a steel grasp even. So they do have some, you know, good utility effects, and the shouts are not really like the, you know, the one shining utility option you have anymore. So that is actually great in my opinion. Also, for those of you guys who have been freely crafting some Barb endgame builds, there is the Melted Heart of Selig unique amulet that gave you 100% maximum resource and an energy shield type of effect. So that one also has been tuned down, and you cannot do like this insane wombo combo Hammer of the Ancients anymore with, you know, I don't know, 500 Fury or something like that. That will also be reduced now. So I don't think that Melted Heart of Selig is going to be any kind of offensive choice anymore. It's only going to be there to enable the energy shield like type playstyle, so to say, as a defensive choice. Then we have the Druid. So I think Druid is actually going to be in a really good spot now. It was already in a really good spot in my opinion, and it's probably even better now because they had like some ups and downs from this patch. So especially the early game is going to be significantly improved now, I believe, because all of the generators are in a better spot, especially the non-Storm Strike generators. So they give you like a lot more resources now. You get like 14 instead of 11 from a mole, for example. You can combine this with the spirit on shapeshifting, so you can get even more spirit like that, and it's just going to feel overall a lot more smooth. They basically buffed all of the generators besides Storm Strike, which was, yeah, really like the strongest one already, so this is fine. A bit of a nerf to Landslide, which is okay, I guess. It will probably make it so that Landslide is not really a great leveling skill, but once you have the wombo combos for it, you're going to be blasting, so this is still fine. And they massively buffed Companions. So Companions, especially the active portion of Companion skills, are actually like triple the damage now or something like that. It's ridiculous. So I think that especially while leveling, a lot of Druid builds, if you don't have like any like defined, you know, legendary aspects, like base builds at this point, Companions, you're just gonna throw them in there and they will destroy everything. So I went ahead and put like a lot of Companions into my 1 to 20 leveling builds here for Druids, for example. Like Wolf, Vine Creeper, and then also the Ravens if you have an extra slot. I think they're all gonna be really nice. You can just get free damage for no resource cost. So you just use that and then have like your own spender to finish off stuff here and there. So it's kind of like how I imagine Druid leveling to go now. Once you unlock those Companions, they're gonna be very powerful. They also buffed all of the Druid ultimates. They all have a shorter cooldown now, so you can use them more often. And I think this will actually lead to relatively easy peasy permanent Druid ultimate uptime in the late game, or at least like very high frequency of users. So even for Lacerate and these kind of things, there are some effects that allow you to reset those cooldowns later in the game, and this will probably make Druid ultimates feel really smooth actually compared to all other classes that usually have very long cooldowns and not really great ways to reduce them. One thing that surprised me a little bit is that they nerfed Cyclone Armor, so they actually halved its damage reduction. I felt that was a bit unnecessary. I didn't really feel like Cyclone Armor was such a good choice to begin with, and now it's quite weak in my opinion. So I'm not really sure if anyone's going to play with that. But on the other hand, they massively buffed Debilitating Roar. It's a 70% damage reduction now, so it's like a pretty massive defensive cooldown that you can use here for any build. So summary for the Druid, I would say the leveling is going to be massively improved, and the endgame didn't actually get hit all too much, especially if you compare it to something like Barb. So I think they're going to be in a really good spot. I already had them ranked as like the second strongest class in the game, and I think they're going to be somewhere around that level, or maybe the best now in general as well. Then we have the Necromancer. So number one is they have been tuned down quite a bit with minion survivability, especially later on. There's, for example, this passive that kept your minions alive, with them only taking X% of their life in damage at most in one hit. So that was massively nerfed. So they will die more frequently to large attacks. This is something that doesn't really concern you much in the server slam, but it will definitely be a concern later in the higher levels, I think. I wasn't really expecting minion necromancers to really be good in the end game anyway, because I think that's probably just going to be a lack of damage scaling, and yeah, scaly builds will just be like, you know, some just for fun off meta stuff basically, and most builds will actually just like sacrifice all of their skellies, but we'll see. Maybe there's some reasons to actually include them for some of the utility effects. They did nerf some of the stuff that was really broken OP. For example, Bone Splinter's got a heavy damage nerf. It's, you know, actually a generator now that you use to generate essence and maybe get some effects. They also pretty massively nerfed Corpse Explosion, but this was also expected. But they didn't actually touch this Miasma Corpse Explosion upgrade. So you can still play that, and I felt that was already like a pretty viable option, and it has not really been touched. So if you are a Corpse Explosion enthusiast, you don't have like this burst Corpse Explosion being that powerful anymore, but you can use the Miasma, and at least if you have like longer fights, it will still deal pretty much the same damage. So this is good news there. They buffed Bloodlands pretty massively as well, so Bloodlands is going to be really good now. I think especially for like single target killing and for like these kind of like few target, like, you know, kind of cleave combat. This is going to be very good. So I think Bloodlands was already in a pretty good spot actually, so we're gonna see that's actually gonna be one of the top builds now, I think. And of course the Perma Blood Mist Corpse Explosion combo, in case you're wondering about that, that is gone. So you can still reset your Blood Mist a little bit, but they massively nerfed this cooldown reduction effect, so I don't think it will be possible to actually have this like Perma Blood Mist stuff going on. You can probably still have really high uptime though, so if you like that playstyle, it's still there, and then you play with this Corpse Explosion Miasma stuff, and you're gonna be okay. Then we have the Rogue. Rogue actually got out of this relatively well, I'd say, and I think this is rightfully so. Like, while everyone has their eyes on the Rogue with like the OP Twisting Blades build, you know, soloing Ashava in like 2 seconds, all this kind of stuff, I was not really expecting Rogue to be like the top performer in the late game. I expected to be a relatively fast class, really good for farming, especially in the hands of a good player. But in general, I felt like Rogue was not really going to be like just powerful, you know, by itself, as for example Barbs and Druids. So they didn't really get like a lot of nerfs here, just like some minor adjustments here and there, and they nerfed the imbuements, which was already known. So this was expected. They put the cooldown from 9 seconds to 13 seconds. That's actually a relatively significant cooldown increase. I was actually expecting less, like 11 or maybe 12, but I think 13 is still okay. And I think this will actually allow people to, yeah, kind of get their focus away from the imbuements a little bit and appreciate more the massive toolkit that the Rogue actually offers. And there are a lot of other really good skills to use on a Rogue. So Shadow Imbuement is not gonna just like easy peasy blow up every single pack anymore. And there is also Cold Imbuement, which I already felt was not really all that great to begin with, which didn't really get a compensation for the cooldown increase. So I'm not really sure how much this will really play a role in late game. I think it's gonna be still a very useful tool for PvP, but I'm not so sure about PvE, but we'll see. And then there's Poison Imbuement, which actually got compensated for this cooldown nerf. So it's actually stronger now, deals more damage. So it actually came out a bit ahead. And on top of this, it has way better synergy now with the, I don't know what's the name, the Poison Imbuement legendary aspect that actually allows you to just spam Poison Imbuement. So if it deals more damage and the cooldown is irrelevant with that aspect, this is going to be a pretty powerful endgame combo, I believe. But yeah, overall looking really good. They actually buffed a few of the defensive passes in particular on the Rogue. They didn't actually buff any of the offensive ones. So, for example, the Mending Obscuri now can heal you for up to 9% health per second while stealthed. So this is a pretty massive healing here that you can just get whenever you press your Concealment. In general, Concealment has a really powerful effect now with a 6-second vulnerable proc. So I think this will be quite interesting. But you also won't be able to just like reset it that easily. So especially if you were going to play a Twisting Blades Rogue, they have massively nerfed the cooldown reduction on Twisting Blades. So from 1 second per enemy hit to 0.25 seconds. But you still have the same cap of up to 3 seconds. So if you hit many targets, you can still reset your stuff really fast. That was kind of expected, I gotta say. I was not really thinking that this whole cooldown reduction thing on Twisting Blades would really survive. So we're just not gonna play that too much anymore, I think. And that's probably a good move. One nerf on the rogue that I can absolutely not understand though is the nerf to precision imbuement. I felt like this was already not really like the craziest passive, and now that they nerfed imbuements in general, so you're gonna have usually fewer of them in your build and you will be able to activate them less. They also nerfed this passive that goes with it, so that's kind of like a double down there that will just make this passive pretty much useless. So this is a bit strange. And then we have the Sorcerer. So they actually had some pretty big up and down here as well. So what you need to know is Chain Lightning is pretty gutted, I would say, especially for like single targets. So it's not going to be like this one skill that just evaporates everything anymore. So if you want to level a Sorc with Lightning, I guess you're going to focus more on Arc Lash and just like generate your way through the game, basically. Hydra was also hit pretty hard, but it is still a really good skill. It was just that OP, so this is probably fine. And Ice Blades and this whole like cooldown Ice Blades stuff also got hit really hard. So this might be something for like way late game when you have more tools available now. But this whole like, cooldown resetting, everything, spammed every second is not gonna happen that easily anymore. So forget about your perma flame shield, your perma ice armor, whatever, your like 20,000 procs every second. That is probably not happening anymore. And if you want to play this kind of like cooldown based Ice Blade build, you're gonna have to have like a real combo for it. They also tuned down some of the defenses on the Sorc, which were actually really powerful. So for example, Align the Elements. This was usually like this no-brain, like, put 1 point in there and you have like insane elite damage reduction. So I think this is also kind of good that you don't have like this insanely powerful, elite damage reduction effect basically for Sorcs. So it's probably still worth picking up sometimes for like 1 point. Just have like this damage reduction scale up over time, but it's like way slower now. And also they nerfed this passive that gives you a barrier when you use a cooldown. So you're not gonna have like easy peasy permanent barrier uptime anymore. It's just a way shorter duration now, and you're gonna not really have barriers that easily. So you're gonna have ice armor, and then maybe you're gonna proc this thing once in a while, or maybe some other effects of barriers. So if you want to have perma barriers as a Sorc, you're gonna have to try a lot harder now. Other than that, they did buff Frost Nova, so it's a 3-second freeze now. This is very powerful, I think. And on top of this, they also buffed Ice Shards with more ricochet chance. So Ice Shards was already a really strong build in my opinion, and it just got 2 buffs from that, so that is very good. So that's definitely something to look out for. And they have also buffed Meteor. So I don't think that Meteor is going to be something really worth using in like the Server Slam. But I think that Meteor actually had insanely large endgame potential, and now it deals a lot more impact damage. And on top of this, they buffed the enchantment for it as well, from 3% chance to trigger meteors to 8%, so almost triple of the procced meteors. So I think this is definitely something to look out for, at least on the game's launch, for potential endgame combo build. There are also some legendary aspect nerfs that actually are surprisingly little, I gotta say. So I was actually expecting a lot more adjustments on legendary aspects, especially the skill-specific legendary aspects, because I felt they were like across the board too powerful. There are definitely some really strong examples, such as the Pulverized Shockwave, for example, or the +1 Hydra, or these kind of effects. The Twisting Blades one actually got nerfed a little bit, for example. But yeah, in general, I felt like the skill-specific legendaries were too mandatory, and they should have been tuned down and more power put into the base skills, so that you still have the option to actually use a skill-specific legendary or a generic legendary. I think they should be on the same power level, but this is not what we got. Outside of a few examples here of the Barb that I mentioned at the start, they have actually not really touched too many legendary powers. They did nerf some, for example, the Druid Companion power, but they so massively buffed the companions themselves that this will actually still come out as a net gain, basically. So this is fine. And they did tune down some of the generic offensive and defensive aspects though. So especially some of the defensive ones got hit, which was quite surprising, I guess. But it also makes them like less mandatory. So this is kind of good, I think. And then some of the like more popular generic aspects. For example, here the accelerating, where you get extra attack speed on crits, or Edge Masters, which is more damage based on your primary resource. So those effects did get a nerf because they were probably just like too universally useful. They were just, you know, you can just throw them in every single build. And I guess now it's more about actually trying to find the right build for those aspects so that they really shine. So, you know, something like Edge Masters is really going to be used on, you know, like an inner side rogue, for example, where you have like perma full resource and you always have this effect. And it's otherwise an unconditional damage buff, which is very nice. It works against bosses. It doesn't rely on crowd control, these kind of things. So it is still not a bad one, in my opinion, depending on your build. They also tuned down some of those stacking legendary powers, as I mentioned. So here's, for example, the Expectant. Increase your damage of your next core skill after using a basic skill. So this was able to go up to 50%, for example, instead of 30%. So you can't just like, you know, attack, and then have like this insane mega burst. Basically, this is like tuned down a little bit, but shouldn't really impact the general gameplay here, I think. And also another few small nerfs to something like, for example, smiting. So this used to be 25% critical strike chance and then up to 50% crowd control duration. But I think something like that is also okay because this was like a very universally strong aspect. So it's probably fine. So yeah, this is it for what I wanted to talk about now. Obviously, as I mentioned, there is more stuff to you know, look at in detail and like, you know, dig into. If you want to look at any changes for your own build, you will probably have to take a closer look. But I do have to say that I think Blizzard is really moving in the right direction. They seem to be aware of what is good and what is bad. So they probably have like, you know, data and everything. And yeah, based on my gut feeling, I generally agree with almost all of the changes. There are a few question marks in between here, like the Cyclone Armor, for example, where I'm really puzzled. But outside of that, yeah, I think they did a really good job with those adjustments. In the end, we always have to remember that it's never going to be the final version of the game anyway. This is just, you know, for now, you know, this is the current balancing snapshot, so to say. And of course, if some stuff ends up too strong or too weak, there will always be other adjustments down the line. There will be a constant meta changes every season. So if something is bad now, it doesn't have to stay bad forever. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts about this update, what kind of build you had in mind or that came up for you now because of it. And I'll see you guys next time.